And thank you for inviting me to speak, or rather for selecting my abstract. So my name is Fatini. Just a brief introduction to how I ended up doing this research. I come from maybe you would think of it as a traditional sort of English/comparative literature setting. And my research was about 20th century English literature. Specifically, I was interested in how authors became famous during that time. Kind of the networks, politics around authorial fame, how it came about. It was not too hard to trace processes of legitimation. So, for example, famous journals, editors, influential people talking about other influential people. I then took all the data and put it in a computer system, and then it generated a sort of like visualized network. Works pretty seamlessly. But when the economies of digital the digital media sort of came up as a big factor in the process of reputation making, I received a lot of questions during conferences or from editors and peer reviewers when it comes to what happens with reputation when you've got digital media at play. And that's how I started looking into social media, specifically social media poetry, and then after that AI poetry. So a bit of a strange trajectory. Okay, so today I'm actually going to talk about major ideas in critical theory in a way, and how we might revisit them from the perspective of AI poetry. But I guess one could even think of it in terms of a creator more generally. So it is applicable to anybody who works in cinema or music or any field really. So over the last couple of years, we have all witnessed natural language processing extend to the generation of highly sophisticated content. ChatGPT 2, 3, 4, we all know about it. This content includes literary texts, and AI's ability to compose poetry has been the talk of the town. Sorry, I'm just gonna do this. Yeah, has been the talk of the town. The genre of poetry represents a paradox. It is thought of at once as the purest manifestation of human consciousness and as the most esoteric and inaccessible of art forms. But it is largely due to this paradox that the poetry standard, or what I call here the poetry standard, has emerged as a new variation of a Turing test. Poetry has become the benchmark against which AI's potential dominance is often measured. If the machine can write poetry, the highest of art forms, which few humans can understand and even fewer can compose, then somehow it has won. But no, perhaps poetry itself won't suffice. After all, automatically produced poetry or robopoetics is kind of old news. The goalpost has shifted. Perhaps AI has won if it can produce good poetry. And that's exactly when things start getting trickier. So as things stand, AI can yield outputs that imitate the style of, say, Shakespeare or Virginia Woolf. These outputs are often virtually indistinguishable from the writing of the masters that are being emulated. According to a large-scale study conducted by researchers at the University of Amsterdam and the Max Planck Institute, readers are not able to distinguish between the poet Maya Angelou's works and poems generated by ChatGPT back in the day, when there is a human in the loop. Human in the loop means somebody who selects the best AI outputs to place along a human-written poem. In short, machines excel at imitation, and if we can assist them a bit with selection, anybody could be easily duped. But what about entirely new poetry generated by fine-tuned large language models? The quality of this sort of AI poetry is up for debate. According to some critics, AI verse is hardly up to scratch. And I'm quoting here from Carmine Starnino's essay in The New Criterion. It's an excellent essay, regardless of one agrees or disagrees, is my opinion. So according to Carmine Starnino, GPT-3's output is a shell of hyperactivity with nothing inside. A mesmerizing mix of materials without a center, language on autopilot. The poems it generates ring dead. They have no sense of conviction, build no internal pressure, achieve no meaningful closure. If we are happy with poems produced by machines, Starnino argues in the same essay, then that is because our standards are becoming too low. It's not the machine that has won, it is us who have lost. And this is precisely why the poetry standard is a very contentious one. Alongside testing how capable machines are in writing poetry, it also sheds light on how elusive its evaluation is for people. Few readers prefer poetry over novels, and even fewer are aware of the technicalities of its composition. So Starnino's terms, conviction, internal pressure, and meaningful closure might be part of the lexicon of the critic or the academic, but are also somewhat arbitrary categories that do not necessarily resonate with the younger generation of poetry readers. So by the early 2000s, poetry was thought to have fallen into obscurity. It was considered difficult, incomprehensible, it was out of vogue, and critics were prophesizing the death of the genre. But around 2017, something happened, and poetry sales doubled. This new boom was attributed largely to social media and the hype created around Insta poetry. I'm sure many of you have heard of Insta poetry. It refers to easily digestible poems published on Instagram, written to fit the conventions of social media in terms of brevity and relatable messaging. In short, Instagram made poetry cool again. But why did it succeed when the great voices of modernism and traditional publishing practices failed? In an article published by The Guardian, Michelle Dean argues that Insta poets have cleverly managed to combine the internet's love of an inspirational quote with artful typography and immediate shareability. Poems are ideally suited in some ways to social media because they pack so much meaning into so little language. One of the most celebrated personalities of the Insta poetry movement, Rupi Kaur, has enjoyed popularity that traditional literary poets could only dream of. Since its release in 2014, her collection of poems Milk and Honey has sold over 2.5 million copies in 25 languages, spending 77 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. This is an example of her poetry. She usually combines it with sort of sketches and artworks. In light of the popularity of Insta poetry, poetry's revival seems to go hand in hand with the debunking of high art and the canon, and the emergence of new voices that are shareable and accessible, that converse with current trends, visual cues, and new technologies. Now, could Insta poetry be a gateway to the popularity of more traditional poetry? Not so much, Henry Oliver argues in an article entitled "Instagram is the Future of Poetry, Ignore the Snobbishness of the Literary Elites," where he points out that traditional literary poetry was still not represented by poetry's best-selling surge. According to him and other critics that he quotes, this is because poetry has been so exclusive. For example, the poetry of high modernism is a closed shop, the elitist grazing grounds of those with creative writing degrees and university lectureships. There is a need, Oliver seems to suggest, for us to expand our definition of poetry to include verse that is happening, which has sprung from digital media to communicate meaning with clarity. It is not hard to imagine that artificial intelligence could excel in this remediated version of the genre, and even produce a taste for it. On the one hand, its outputs do not need to live up to high poetic standards, often considered esoteric and inaccessible, and which elude wider audiences. On the other, random and unexpected combinations in grammatically coherent formulations, sprinkled with some evocative effect, which is what we might identify as poetry in its most inclusive framing, are methods of composition, or freestyling, that AIs are by now proficient in. To recap, whether AI can write good poetry cannot be broached unless we ask a different set of questions. What qualifies as good poetry? Who is to deem it as such? And what sort of audiences is poetry trying to reach? At a time when social media have redefined art and criticism and showed up the literary establishments for its fixation on the highbrow, favoring the popular and the relatable instead, the question of what is good writing becomes even more pertinent. AI forces us to rethink who we trust to quality control the text. We no longer have just good or bad poets, an assessment with which we have historically entrusted the authorities of criticism and literary reviewing. We are now called to also attach the labels good and bad to machine-generated poetry, or to poetry of the in-between, for example, hybrid writing between humans and AI, or outcomes of expert prompt engineering. So, to have a conversation about whether AI poetry meets a specific standard, we clearly cannot rely on whether humans can tell a human-written poem apart from a machine-generated one. They often can't. but on a set of rules about what constitutes literary worth. And at least according to some standards, for example, if we define good writing as what people like, what is popular, what is relatable, what generates most views and clicks, we might have to accept that machines are capable of producing good poetry. But let us imagine hypothetically that at some point AI will produce poetry that will satisfy the most eclectic of tastes, that of seasoned literary critics and knowledgeable reviewers. Even then, things aren't simple. A new question is introduced. How much do we really care about a good poem, irrespective of its source? And this goes back to a question that has been key to the history of ideas. Do we care about the text's author? Do we care about who it is that speaks? Now let's go back to the 60s very briefly and to the path-breaking notion of the death of the author as it was articulated by the post-structuralists. Two famous essays, The Death of the Author by Roland Barthes, written in 1967, and What is an Author by Michel Foucault. It is from a quote of this essay that I've taken the title for my talk. Written in 1969, these two essays have signposted the movement of the death of the author. The main idea was this: let us abandon the tyrannical figure of the author in favor of language and the text. At the end of the day, the text is a testament to our shared linguistic inheritance, to a long tradition rearranged into a new order, to the workings of a universal linguistic subconscious. In short, nobody writes as a singular agent. After its production, the text takes on a life of its own, and this is something for which a single author cannot take credit. The death of the author placed new emphasis on the reader, who was now considered an active participator in meaning-making, filling the textual gaps and making sense of a text in their own terms. But prioritizing a text while decentering the author is an idea not entirely dissimilar to a sophisticated version of crowdsourcing. The text as a filtered combination of traditions, language, and influences. Is this not precisely what large language models do by ingesting large amounts of data and arranging them into new, coherent, and unique outputs? So the death of the author and the adjacent advocacy for anonymous writing also went hand in hand with the erasure of intention. What is called the intentional fallacy pointed out an error, attributing a text's intention to its author and closing off other interpretative possibilities, or looking at the facts of an author's life to interpret the writing. Think, for example, of any singular interpretive direction. So-and-so didn't have a father present in their life, and therefore this poem's barren form is meant to indicate the lack of a father figure. Interpretations based on an author's intention and biography were cast as poor critical practice. Humans were deemed capable of inhabiting positions different from their own, and of plunging into shared histories that signaled the depersonalization of the writing process. Now the thing is, machines are by definition anonymous and depersonalized. They do not possess identity or intention. And what is more, they do not even possess functional intentionality. And what I mean by functional intentionality is the paratext of the writing process, which sometimes works through an absence of action. Now think, for example, a writing block, whereby not writing itself is part of writing. A machine cannot say, I will not write today because I am not in the mood, and does not operate on notions of random inspiration. But such notions are important in explaining our humanity back to us. So is a tone of voice, which does not emerge from a single output, but from what we call an oeuvre, which is a trajectory rather than a singular creative moment. A human authorial subject with a recognizable tone of voice, as well as what we call a life's work, are entangled with a process of maturity that is both creative and biological. The early works and the later works, the evolution of a writing style, the influences absorbed along the way which can be political and historical, or conversant with other creators, not just in terms of a shared tradition, but in terms of a live network of human interactions. When we read AI literature, we ask, are we happy for a text not to have an author or authors? Is there something we value in human labor, in human limitations, and without meaning to be too psychoanalytical, in death itself? A sense of laboring against finality. Is there value in knowing that an author lives, is in pain, and can die, regardless of whether we decide to figuratively kill them or not? In his defense of embattled authorial subjectivity, the anxiety of influence, Harold Bloom insisted that the author should capture the agonistic image of the human which suffers, the human which thinks, the human which writes, the human which means, albeit too humanly, in that agon the strong poet must wage against otherness, against the self, against the presentness of the present, against anteriority, in some sense against the future. At the very least, it seems important that we should be made aware of whether a text was written by a human or a machine, or by the collaboration between the two, a knowledge which is relevant to our relationship with the textual output. This knowledge, the author Orhan Pamuk suggested in an article for the New York Times, is part of the pleasure of reading, even if it is fallacious. We love poets for the things their poems lead us to imagine. But equally, we love them for how we imagine their lives to be. Confusing poets' lives with their work is an illusion as old as the tradition of confusing words with objects. But in fact, it is for the sake of this illusion that we feel such a strong need for poetry, for novels, for literature. Great poets can tell their own stories without once saying I, and in doing so, lend their voice to all of humanity. Pamuk is not talking about biographical interpretation here, clearly, but of imagination, of inhabiting the world of other positionalities and finding something universal about what is said of those worlds. And this takes me to another final objection to the death of the author and the idea of a freestanding text, which predates AI. In a now classic book written in 1992, entitled The Death and Return of the Author, Sean Burke takes Barthes and Foucault to task for the theoretical formulation of the death of the author, which encompassed, in his view, the complete annihilation of human subjectivity, and, quote, the reduction of literature to an impersonal play of signification, unquote. He brought forward the idea of political accountability. In the case of pro-Nazi writers, for example, or apologists of colonialism, is it not important to turn to the writing subject as a source of a set of ideas? One of the most alarming aspects of AI content is the reproduction of biased perspectives that counter diversity and inclusivity. For example, the espousal of negative, even harmful stereotypes pertaining to race and gender. Today, given our turn to identity politics and the emphasis we place on individual accountability and situatedness, it is even more so the case that we have come to care about who it is that speaks or writes. So, as a summary of this whole paper, what I argue here is that AI poems present little interest in their own right, other than as a party trick or as evidence of technological advancement. They do, however, raise important questions about human creativity. What sort of writing do we consider worthwhile? Are we invested in the writing process as a distinctly human activity, or at least a human-mediated one? This necessitates a rethinking of influential ideas about a freestanding text, devoid of a human signature, and a new evaluation of the significance of the humanness of the writing subject. This subject, the author, or authors, is entangled with our ideas about creativity as inspiration, about the self, and at a more political level, with our investment in personal accountability and social progress. There is an ongoing conversation happening about AI regulation and transparency, and I think literature should be part of this conversation. We might indeed want to know who it is that speaks, even when we can't tell. Thank you.
Thank you. I need to say that University of Leeds paid for my train as well, so got to get that one in. Thank you for having me. Perhaps if I could give a little brief introduction as to my kind of angle and interest in sort of AI. I'm interested in in turning to AI to help me with writing. It might become apparent through this presentation that I kind of struggle with coherence and clarity, so I have turned to AI to try and help me kind of get my thoughts straight in order to perhaps write a bit more long form. So and I obviously come from an angle of as a teacher across a number of different institutions, I'm interested in how we learn, so how we might use AI to help us learn, perhaps in a different way to how our universities want to use AI, so a different way. So this talk starts in a car journey that I took with my friend, who is not Michael Knight. Oh, you got it. I didn't think you'd get it. Nor is he a teacher, because he can afford a BMW that he can talk to. So, on a recent car journey, a friend instructed his car's voice recognition system to direct us to our destination. After he'd spoken, there was a pause, and then a hesitant female voice replied, I was stunned. In that confused moment, I was convinced that artificial intelligence had finally arrived at a truly sentient benchmark. What had actually happened was that a delayed response from SatNav's AI had permitted a fortuitous continuation of a radio interview, where the interviewee considered her response to a question, before a more automated male voice took over. This accidental audio collage made me question just what it was that is lacking with contemporary AI. Was it the doubt, the apprehension of a possible error, and the humility? So that's kind of where it starts. So something that happened outside of perhaps a academic research environment made me think about what isn't there from the experiences that I've discovered in using it myself. So the doubt. So one thing that separates us from AI is doubt. As humans, we're kind of trying to make decisions about things. We want to make potentially two or more decisions. So that doubt is the thing that allows us to question what could happen or what has happened. So doubt's quite an important energy in life, in academia, in creative enterprise. But it's the thing that makes us remain curious and critical. So if we're doubting about things, that means that we want to find out more about them and ask questions about the world around us. So obviously not everybody's comfortable with doubt. Doubt within academia is something that is shied away from because it might mean poor NSS results if students might feel uncomfortable in learning situations. But for others, and maybe educators that have been there a long time, it's something that we're okay with. And we try and teach our students to also be okay with it, because that doubt is where you're going somewhere interesting, even if it might be uncomfortable. There's a term which you may have come across called negative capability. So it's this a term that was coined by Keats, who talks about being in uncertainties, mysteries and doubts without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. So not having to have an answer, not having to have a clear idea of what's happening, you're happy to be kind of open to what comes back to you. Also, Maria Popova describes this as the willingness to embrace uncertainty and live with mystery and make peace with ambiguity. So ambiguity's got a nice etymology, this idea that you are kind of walking in doubt. So you're going somewhere, but you might not necessarily know where you're going. Richard Feynman talks about doubt, and he talks about not knowing. Again, there's this idea that it's the cause for finding things out, the cause for an inquiry. So he says, I can live with doubt and uncertainty and not knowing. I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers that might be wrong. This quote came up across lots of places on social media, and instead of me maybe taking about 3 or 4 hours to try and find the proper attribution, I asked ChatGPT, who said, this is the quote that you're looking for, it's from this book. So it allowed me to resolve the reference correctly. Or did it? Here's my conversation. Hi ChatGPT, can you help me find the reference citation details for this Richard Feynman quote? Certainly. How obliging. The quote you provided by Richard Feynman can be found in this book, blah, blah, blah. Specifically, it appears in the chapter titled The Value of Science. Okay, that sounds legit. Which page is that then? So, ChatGPT told me that it's on page 144. So, I could have taken ChatGPT at its word, but from previous experiences, I thought I'd look this up. Page 144. So we're looking for a quote about feeling comfortable without answers. Can't quite see it. So, can you give me the entire paragraph? People will be used to this idea of maybe reverse engineering student essays to see if it's come from somewhere else. But ChatGPT gave me the whole paragraph, which helped me to find it by using some search terms. So yeah, this is me. So thank you. Actually, it's on page 24. So here it is, at the bottom of page 24. So it was, ChatGPT here was semi-helpful, and obviously quite apologetic about it. I apologise for any confusion. The quote you're referring to is indeed from The Pleasure of Finding Things Out, but it seems to appear in different locations depending on the edition. Yeah, right. So that's a little bit of a get out. So I'm not going to look at all the editions to see if it's right, because I've kind of got what I needed to from this encounter. So, page 24. ChatGPT. But yeah, earlier outings with ChatGPT, because I was trying to, I suppose, get some assistance with writing, but it often results in frustration. So my writing might refer to obscure people that talk about education. So it turns out, from my experience, that ChatGPT is a compulsive liar. The journeys were all about being directed to multiple HTTP 404s on Amazon for books he'd made up, people that didn't exist. So this is quite common. I'm sure that many of you will also have come across this before. These hallucinations are common. So instead of admitting to these mistakes, ChatGPT would double down and say, no, you haven't made the mistake. I've made this mistake. This was not a critical friend. I quite like the glitch we got on Richard Feynman's head, kind of drawing these hallucination connections, but I don't know if that's a bit too implicit. So, yeah, this has been my experience of using ChatGPT, mainly for writing. So I suppose we've got to think about what we're using artificial intelligence for. So in the example I gave briefly before, I was looking for an answer. And I suppose the question might be, are these answers right or wrong? I don't know if it's a bingo card for any stuff today, but Douglas Adams might appear a couple of times. But there's an encounter, obviously, in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where Deep Thought is a supercomputer that's a planet that gets asked a question, goes away for thousands, millions of years, and comes back with an answer. But obviously, the answer is 42. It's not quite what people maybe expected or wanted, but the upshot is that it's the question that's the important thing. And this, since the late 1970s, hasn't changed. We still should be either questioning those answers that we get back, or thinking more about what is the question. So it's that thing of asking artificial intelligence to do work rather than to kind of help us with a process of something. So yeah, going back to this idea of getting things potentially wrong, there's a character in an old version of The Legend of Zelda whose name is Error. So if you've ever played these games, this character turns up, and all that the character will say until you do something else is, I am Error. People assume that this was kind of a glitch because this was like repeated over and over again, so it could have looked like something was missing, some code was missing. But it was actually an intentional joke by the developers. So it wasn't a single error because it was a joke. It was ambiguous. There were kind of two ways that you could take this thing. You could take it literally, or you could know about it. So this idea that there was also a character called Bug, which maybe makes the joke a little bit clearer, but it was obviously put in there by the coders, but killed through sort of mistranslation. So it makes us think that the output of artificial intelligence, including errors, needs to be treated as ambiguous, not treated as binary, this singular thing. There was a meeting, I'm sure everyone has meetings about AI currently and what the threat or benefits of it could be, but we had one recently where somebody asked the question, who thinks AI is good and who thinks AI is bad? So this kind of binary, people had to put their hands up to say one or the other. But it's not like that. It's an ambiguous thing. It could be good, it could be bad. But it's more nuanced with that. And we have to meet it with doubt. So doubt not being a negative, doubt being something that encourages us to probe further, to think sort of more deeply. The word error's got quite a nice etymology, from the Latin errare, to wander or to go astray. So an error can be a meandering, it can be doubt, it can be an uncertainty, or it can be a mistake. So again, it's quite an ambiguous term. And there's other words that come from the same place or get associated with error, such as errantry, or errand. Errand actually comes from Germanic origin, around this idea of a message or something that you need to do. So you start to get this idea of purpose coming into the error. There's an artist and educator called Tayun Choi, who used to work for the School of Poetic Computation, who uses the same ambiguity in his work, Errantic Poetry, after Edward Glissant. So it's a piece of work around the poetic possibility for misunderstanding language, which is quite nice when you think about dealing with outputs from machines, whether they're kind of old school ELIZA outputs or whether they're kind of more contemporary ones. This idea that things can have multiple meanings. And this term as well that Choi uses, catachresis, is often defined as things that are being used incorrectly or against convention. But in some ways, this is how we might think about mistake making. So using it, putting an error to good use. So a misunderstanding of language still has the potential for narrative, is one way of looking at that. So yeah, putting an error to good use. There's a set of recordings by David Cunningham, who has used an error system in his performance or composition, where he says that the players play a repeated phrase, and as soon as one player makes a mistake, that mistake is made the basis of this repetition unless it's modified by a further mistake. Thus, each player proceeds at his own rate to change the sound in an uncontrollable manner. On no account should mistakes be made deliberately, and in short, sustain your errors. So that here the error isn't an end result, so it's not like a wrong answer. It's an ongoing process or conversation that you're having. So it's doing more than that. So mistakes, often within computing, a mistake or an error is something that is a bit fatal, fundamental, but obviously within education and creative practice, it's a valuable thing. It's that thing that we kind of, that takes us on a journey of knowledge or experience. But for it to work, we need to acknowledge that we've made one, and when we've made one. So if ChatGPT tells me that he hasn't made a mistake and it's my fault, then that's not helpful, it's not critical, it's also not transparent, which is one of the problems with artificial intelligence. I'm not going near kind of image making artificial intelligence, but that's even more problematic in terms of it being black boxed. So is artificial intelligence transparent about its process? Does it share its learning or its working out? So thinking as an educator, this is what I experience with students, with my own practice, this idea that narrative of learning, that sort of story behind what's happened, is exposed, is perhaps more important than the end result. But does artificial intelligence know enough of how it got there? I don't know if it does. So, coming to the end, one thing that we do at both universities, the University of Leeds and Leeds Beckett, is ask students to use essay writing tools to write their final assignments or an assignment about a piece of work. So what we might expect is for that to, I don't know, it could cause a bit of anxiety with people in terms of it, will they use this tool for their actual thesis to hand in or assignment. But what tends to happen is that it never quite resembles what they expect or their own writing in terms of content and style. So Tristan Zara talks about cut-up poetry, and when you make a cut-up poem by chopping up pieces of newspaper, that at the end of it the poem will resemble you. But it doesn't quite here when you just feed a prompt into ChatGPT and say, can you do this thing for me? But what it does do is that it highlights a difference. So that kind of critical difference of what comes out compared to what you intended or what you would normally do. And it also teaches us to not idly accept an answer without kind of looking critically at it. It also removes the process from making or from writing or thinking. So that important process is removed if we just ask someone to do the work. So the experience there is the thing that is missing. One final thing, my son asked me to use character.ai once, because he was using it as kind of perhaps a fictional friend. So I used it to talk to Georgie Kostova, from Papers, Please, a game by Lucas Pope. So Georgie famously tries to get into Arstotzka using a fake passport. I thought it's interesting to talk to him. So in the conversation, what starts to happen here is that Georgie's asking me questions about himself, about what he's doing. So there's a sense of doubt here. I know it might not be real human doubt, but it's a nice, refreshing change to see this sort of transparency of learning play out in kind of real time. So as the conversation goes along, I tell him he's a meme. He kind of wants me to explain what a meme is, so I start to have to do some work. I start to have to think, well, what is a meme? So I'm kind of learning at the same time, and he's asking further questions. He kind of gets what a meme is based on my clumsy definitions of it. And then he kind of gets quite a good definition by the end. But the final line, how about this? Could my passport drawing be a meme? He then understands that he is a meme by putting this thing out there. So what this conversation has done is it's given this transparent process of learning how this conversation's endpoint here came about. So that's kind of something different. Okay, I'll finish off. So to conclude, we need to acknowledge at this time of writing, I don't know how things will go from here, but that artificial intelligence needs to be met with doubt. Obviously that's a positive, and its contributions treated as ambiguous in that they can go in multiple directions. This uncertainty leads to possibility, identifying potential journeys to take and wanderings to follow away from the conventional path. Artificial intelligence can assist us as a collaborator by offering feedback and highlighting an important difference that helps us to understand, acknowledge and learn from our mistakes. As we go forward, we need to continue to be its critical friend, engaging it in conversation and questioning its output in order to understand our own process of learning. Thank you very much.
I can help.
Silva is an associate professor in EAP and academic literacy at Richmond American
University of London. She is experienced in designing academic and creative writing courses for higher education. Dr. Gillian McGyver is an author, playwright and curator. She taught at the University of Creative Arts in Central St.
Okay, hello everyone, and I'm very delighted to be there. So we will talk about synergy of AI and creative writing, but looking from different perspectives. So I have more expertise in actual teaching academic English and creative writing courses with the use of AI, and we incorporate a lot of AI assessment, AI teaching materials at Richard American University. So we'll be very happy to share my expertise on that. Maybe you will find it useful. And then my colleague then will continue talking about creative writing, but more from professional perspective. Okay, so it will be two parts of our talk. And then if we have time, we can discuss future perspectives. Okay. So just to give a bit of background what's happening at the university where I've been working. So we have School of Liberal Arts, where we have a huge range of academic literacy courses, and also we have doing some creative writing courses, and we've been incorporating AI in our teaching quite like. It's kind of, we have a push from university to kind of pioneer and just see what's happening. Okay, so we have AI teaching materials. We also have all AI assessment, and it's quite interesting, and it's quite interesting to see students' feedback and just how they see AI and whether they find it helpful. And I can talk about it in my conclusion. So first of all, like creative writing in higher education, why it's important, and unfortunately what's happening at the moment in academia, creative writing is considered something which can be like optional course, something you just want to do as a hobby, but unfortunately I don't think it's actually a huge part of program, bachelor or master program, and which is a shame, because I do believe, especially in the current environment where we have to compete with machines, creativity, that's something we possess as humans, which is AI. It's not so great at creating like innovative stuff, like brainstorming great ideas, and therefore that's something which our students need to learn to be more attractive for employability, for their future employers. And storytelling is important because students can learn to look at this different like plots, to feel the characters, to consider different angles, and that's to again improve their creativity, their innovative thinking out of the box, and again come up with something which is new and interesting and can generate discussion. And again, creativity is really important skill for their future jobs. Work with published authors, and again, it's just to learn from really experienced authors, from their good practice of writing, again, get inspired by great ideas, and even maybe do whether just reading their works or actually working in person if you have this possibility. And again, that's a great way to generate ideas and learn from each other. And as I said, it's actually quite good transferable skill, which unfortunately feels like many universities don't really push for. Like actually creativity, it's a great skill, and it doesn't mean like you have to be artist to learn creativity, whereas if you're an engineer, obviously you don't need creativity whatsoever in your life. Or if you're a business person or you're doing marketing or finance, like there is no creativity whatsoever, but there is one. It's just different type of creativity. I think it's just being open to new ideas and just try to be innovative and maybe interdisciplinary, and think about what you can pick from different industries and just bring it into what you are doing and make something interesting. And therefore, I think creative writing is one of the skills to kind of open you up to the world and to see what it can bring. So then the question comes, okay, we have AI, and how AI can be used in creative writing courses or academic writing courses. So, well, first of all, one of the, I think, most powerful use of AI, and again from my students' feedback, is that it helps ideation to generate initial ideas. Why many people don't like writing? Because we kind of have this writer's block. You see a blank page and you're completely frozen. You don't have any ideas. You don't know where to start from, how to write the first sentence. And many students struggle with that, especially those students like kind of new generation where just get used to just texting, like very short one, whereas actually write a full page of text, it feels really intimidating. And means it's like, no, I don't write, I can't write, I'm really horrible at that, I have no ideas, I just feel blank. Whereas AI can help in this way, just to give some initial ideas. So many students feel very anxious approaching their teachers or tutors or professors, like, why not? I have no ideas what to start with. They feel really bad, like, oh, they might think I'm really bad, I'm really lazy, I don't have any ideas. Whereas AI offers kind of a safe platform where they can have this interaction. Like, what about like, talking about that? What do you think about that? So it's a kind of a pal in your PA in a way, which can give you some ideas and will be super friendly to you and will not critique or judge you. So it's great for those students who feel like they don't have any writing skills. So maybe that's a way, like a first push for actually improve their creativity and start writing. And then second is drafting. So again, drafting can be quite like a torture for some students, because you created something, you seem like it's okay, and then after a week time you read again, you think it's all crap, it's not nice, and I'm really horrible, okay? And then you just feel like, no, I'm not a good writer, I just stop, because it just doesn't work. But again, what AI can help is, again, you can continue doing this dialogue, yes, and then sharing different ideas, maybe restructuring. And again, it's a very safe environment for students to start with, okay, and to improve. And final revision. Well, first of all, this proofreading. Again, many students may struggle, like it's maybe dyslexic student, students for whom English is not their first or second language. So they may think, okay, my English is it's not really like up to native speaker level. I make a lot of typos. Obviously, it's not a good writing. But that's where AI can help, because you can have a brilliant idea and you just to do proofreading, which you don't need to pay a fortune to go to professional one. And this, again, it's a nice revision stage which you can incorporate in your creative writing and produce a really interesting piece. So what I want to focus on is the two types of writing which we use at Richmond American University, and then where AI can be incorporated. So the first one is collaborative writing. So what's happening, so it's a like more pedagogical perspective, like look at different stages of way how we teach it. So collaborative, what we mean by is actually collaborate with AI. So we try, it's great to focus on the product, yes, what actually you end up with, but what we try to teach in our literacy course is focus on the process. So actually how you start writing, how you revise, how you draft your essay or narrative you do. So what's happening, so students choose a topic, okay? So they have a topic in their mind, they don't know where to start, okay? How to do that. Then they pose a question to look at the answer and evaluate it. So that's about collaboration. So you collaborate, basically there are two authors, if you can think so. And so they get ideas from AI, which can help them start writing. Then the AI output is an additional resource for students to use. So it doesn't mean that you just copy and paste what AI produces, but it's more about continue having this dialogue with the machine and just getting the best answers, or the answer which will inspire you, continue writing, yes, or producing your ideas. And again, what we try to do is actually give students like time to get involved in discussion. So, for example, you want to critique something, you disagree with something AI produces. So again, you have this kind of a debate with the machine, which is great, because that's something which some students feel very. It was quite an interesting experience, like, you know, actually having debate with machine and like disagree and like try to argue or ask them to support their arguments. But I think it's a great way to also improve their critical skills and skills to express themselves and be like comfortable agreeing or disagreeing with somebody, and also supporting their arguments with evidence. So again, it's great, again, gives a safe platform for students. And again, it's all like skeptical and critical approach to information gain. So I think what students learn from AI, that it's not perfect, which is great. Yes, it is not perfect, and it's because some students may have this wrong idea, this kind of magical bullet, and you just insert your prompt and then you get best essay and just submit to get A. Well, it doesn't happen in reality, and that's why they start being more critical about the web itself and the internet, what information you get from there, and just get to be critical to what you read, yes, and don't think about this filter bubble where we are, we just get what the algorithm gives us rather than actually what we want to get. So that's example for collaborative writing. So basically it's about collaboration between a machine and human and the way like what you produce in the end. Another type of writing is called reflective writing. So this one is again more about teaching AI. Yeah. So I choose a topic and prepare open-ended questions. And you have again conversation with AI and ask him analyze the different responses. But what's interesting here, okay, take notes, again, you can agree, disagree, but you submit and save conversation and you also write, for example, a report summarizing the experience. So it's not about creating something like a new narrative or a new story, but it's about reporting your experience actually. What you've learned from AI, yes, what was really interesting, what you disagree with AI. So again, it improves critical skills of students and it's again offers some unique opportunity just to debate and talk with a machine. And what we do usually after any assignments or like a big projects, we ask them to write a critical reflection, which was inspired by Gibbs 1988, but we kind of adjusted to AI. So they have to talk about the feelings of the process, how they found AI was actually, did they feel anxious? Because it's important to understand what students feel, yes, and how they feel about using it. Some people feel like actually very confident, many people feel like really bad using AI because it's unethical, it's kind of cheating. So it's great to have a range of opinions because then we can implement them in pedagogy. And then they have to evaluate what was useful, what was not useful, and then reflect what they would do differently next time, what they have learned from it. And again, it's a great way to kind of go backwards and just see what's happened there, and then make your next writing experience better, yes, and more efficient. And just to conclude my part, and then I will give the floor to Gillian, what I found from my experience teaching AI for a year in academic literacy courses is student-centered learning, access to digital tools make students active participants, which is great because, as I said, many students feel very anxious, don't feel confident enough to express themselves, so it's another platform to give them like a different mode of teaching and learning, so something they can find useful. Enhancing writers' perception of their creativity being amplified, so actually understanding where is their creativity, how machine can contribute to that. And it can encourage more students, especially anxious ones, attempting creative writing to actually bring more creative writing to university and academia. Okay, so thank you, and then I will give the floor to Julia.
Okay, hi everybody, I'm Gillian McIver. I am a writer, curator. My background is in art history and cinema studies. Filmmaker, and so I have a lot of different experiences in different kinds of writing, including journalism, screenwriting, playwriting. So writing is something I've been doing for a long time. The problem is anybody who works as a writer, whether it's professionally or just for fun, at some point you're always going to come up against writer's block. Writer's block, if it's a creative project, can be very frustrating. If it's a professional project and you have a deadline, it can be absolutely terrifying. So we always have to try to find, when we come up to the closed road, we have to try to find the detour. And there are a lot of different techniques that traditionally we use for writer's block. So after you're just sort of staring at the blank page or the screen for a period of time, you then, or when you just, actually the main way you get writer's block is the procrastination. So you need to actually come up with a solution. So two of the principal strategies that many writers, including myself, use are free writing and mind mapping. So I'm going to actually just talk you through how I have used both free writing and mind mapping, incorporated AI, generative AI techniques for both of these, and that they've certainly worked for me, which is why I'm now starting to workshop them with other people. So free writing is essentially you set a timer and then you get a prompt, you create a prompt. Traditionally you create it yourself, and you just start writing continuously for a set period of time without stopping to edit or judge your work. And this can help just kind of break through your inhibitions and get your ideas flowing. The other is, particularly for people like myself who's very visual, is mind mapping, where you actually visually brainstorm ideas by triggering your writing through assembling images, and you then sort of create or refine a central topic, and you can kind of branch out with related thoughts and details. So it's about creating a sort of visual matrix. And in my case, I usually use images for that. So how can AI tools help? Well, they're just yet another set of tools that the writer can have, but I found them to be extremely useful. So with free writing, we usually use prompts, or many people use prompts in free writing. But when you're really blocked, actually it can be helpful to have somebody help you with the prompt. And actually AI can be very useful in generating text prompts from random words that you feed in. And this is great when even coming up with the prompts is difficult. So I'll give you an example of an exercise that I did. I wanted to write some flash, I didn't actually have writer's block, but I decided to set myself a task, write some flash fiction. Flash fiction is a brief fictional narrative, normally 100 to maximum 1,000 words, usually around about 300. But it still has plot and character development. So it could be quite a task, actually. So I fed into ChatGPT, give me write me a question using the words afternoon, lunch, cocktail, argument. So ChatGPT gave me the question: should a slightly tipsy afternoon lunch cocktail ever be blamed for a heated argument, or is it just a convenient excuse when tensions were already simmering? Well, that's a great prompt, actually. And if you've got writer's block, you're not going to come up with a prompt as good as that. So you can also, if you're working on an assignment, say writing an article for somebody, then you can actually feed in the keywords from the given theme or the assignment. So that was one I made up, but you could actually use one from a brief. So I ended up, here's my story, because I normally write by hand and then I type it. So I wrote my story, and of course free writing, you just write it. So here's my story. Obviously don't think I'm going to have time to read it to you. But in this short period of time, I actually managed to have characters, and there's some development. It's about these two women having cocktails on the beach, and the one is sort of having this sort of, feeling that very dissatisfied, and the feeling that there's an unspoken argument between them. It turns out that she's her daughter, and she's meeting her mother for the first time, and so she's having this internal argument, and so this was the story that I created. It turned out to be quite a nice piece of flash fiction. This is it without being edited or anything like that. So I was really happy with this. Now, of course, I did, just out of curiosity, ask ChatGPT to write me, to use the same prompt to write a story. It turned out to be really awful, with no drama, no tension, no information about the characters, no sense of setting, it just had a really easy resolution. It's very boring and has a boring writing style. So it was obvious that the brilliance of the prompt was not matched by the story at all. So it was great for writing me a prompt, terrible for writing the story, which I think is quite indicative. So my method actually is I come up with the keywords, or I use a keyword from a brief. ChatGPT creates me my prompt. I sit down and write it by hand. I then use voice recognition software because I hate typing. I then edit it myself. And then I use a spelling and grammar checker, because why not? And then I then personally edit it, because I don't always like the recommendations that the grammar checker offers. Sometimes I like my little errors, and then I finish it. So this is my workflow for writing, and I find it really efficient. And the fact is I've got I've got my ChatGPT here, I've got my voice recognition software here, I've got my spelling and grammar checker. So I'm embedding the AI process really in most of the writing that I do. But the creative, the decision-making process is entirely mine. And I think that from a professional writer's point of view, this is really helpful because I'm seeing it as a tool. It is just as much of a tool as a saucepan is to a chef, as a hammer is to a carpenter. So I think, you know, as Svetlana is pointing out, we can use these things in a really productive way, or we can use them in a way of being lazy. But as a professional writer, there's just really no, I'm not going to ever get published or commissioned if I'm lazy and unimaginative. So now just quickly, I'm going to just mention briefly the mind mapping because it's kind of a bit different. And one of the main ways people use mind mapping for writing is mood boards. So, you know, my question was, I'm setting this scene in Paris. I need it to be romantic but miserable. So this is what I got. And it's a play actually set in the 18th century. The problem is these images aren't really indicative of sort of action and character. So I then went to AI. I used a thing called Night Cafe Studio. Conjure up, you know, sort of historical images of Paris. Give me some characters. I then assembled my mood board with these. Now this isn't art, okay? And I'm not using this in a public context, but it was very helpful for me to get the mood, to come up with the characters. And my story is set like is in the 18th century. There's a bit of a love triangle between these three real life actually people. So I was actually able, rather than relying on the pre-existing images, I was able to actually create my own. What I did feed in was specifically 18th century engravings or 18th century paintings, giving the names of the artists so that I could get the, so with the paintings, I was saying, you know, Francois Boucher or whoever, and for the engravings, you know, Gilray and Rowlandson and Hogarth. So I was getting sort of reasonably historically accurate images. As I said, I'm not actually, this is not original, but it gives me a flavor of the time. And so I was actually able to put those on my mood boards because if I hadn't created them, I would have had to rely on pre-existing images, and they're fairly limited. So, and this was a way that actually was giving my imagination freedom to picture the characters in their settings, in their actions, and that was actually really helpful for me. So to conclude, I mean, obviously my verdict is it's better to find sort of ethically, creatively responsible ways to use AI rather than to reject it. It's with us. As creatives, we can demand that these tools be used in that way. I mean, there's a whole other issue about copyright. I tend to really, when it comes to images, always request it specifically for artwork that reference to artwork is out of copyright. I use AI's images as tools to write, not as artworks. I use the text generators for writing prompts, and I, of course, use it to proofread my work, because as I said, why not? It's there. So just to sum up, I think that we both Svetlana and I are trying to just find responsible ways to make the writing process better, because maybe in the future we won't need writers, but actually we're not living in the future, we're living in the present, and there's still a huge demand for arts, literature, cinema, television programs, and all of those things use writers. Thank you.